right.
Folks, welcome back. It's time for the conversation to continue. We're talking about police reform. The Kenya Police, is it a service, really, or is it still a police force? And before we went on break, we have just heard from our three guests here, and some of what they're saying is quite interesting. Now, we're lucky that one of them is actually a former police officer himself, coming from a line of police officers in the family.
Okay.
Perhaps let's get a little bit of your experience, George. Just help us understand. Talk to us through what you found when you came in as a new recruit. First of all, what was your impression of the service or the force? And what did you find when you got there? And what happened when you left and when you returned again? Please.
I'm a third generation cop in my family. There was my grandfather, who was a colonial police officer. My father later joined the service, and then I joined the service. And when I joined the service, was out of passion. Yeah, I looked at myself as a career policeman. I felt like because grandfather was here, father was here, I can also be a policeman. And the face I had of the police before joining, because I used to live in the police lines, I used to interact with policemen then, the way they used to carry out themselves, the uniforms, the kitting, the welfare, was quite different from what I experienced when I joined the service. At least those years, when my father was in the service, they were trying to improve the career of these policemen. They were trying to improve the welfare. But the first picture I got when I first reported at GSU training school is a story for another day.
Okay. Oh, because that's the Muktasari.
Because when you get there, you're being escorted by probably your sister, your brother. She or she is told, yako imeishi hapa, this is now our man. You have ile sanduku ya mabati, unaambiwa weka kwa kichwa. You run like 500 meters carrying your luggage. You fail, you come back, start again until they're impressed with you. And the kind of mistreatment during reception now tells you now you're in a different world. And then the next step is shaving your hair completely. Napigwa ile shave kabisa, you're told now, if you defeated the chief in the village, ulishinda ulimwengu, sisi ndio ulimwengu sasa. So you see, that kind of training instills some form of attitude and some traits in you that were not with you before. And during the course of the training, because we trained for 9 months, these instructors always harassing the recruits. I mean, it's like you've gone there for punishment. And if you ask them, they'll tell you, we are hardening you for the service. Because out there, when you're going to meet members of the public, raia ni mnyama. They will not treat you the way your mother treated you. So that kind of mindset, and remember, I talked about a colonial service, force, I mean. So we've carried that because when the police was established, it was there to protect the British colonialists that were here. It was there for their interests, not the interests of the Kenyans. And that is why at some point, we had the chiefs saying like, we also need protection. Because when you're dealing with these members of the public, that is when resistance has started coming in. People started talking about Mau Mau. People started talking about independence. So in 1929, we came up with what we called the tribal police. Later, we named this the AP. So you see that kind of training that was coming from those days, because you're not coming out here you're coming to deal with hardcore criminals that were considered the Mau Mau. As opposed to now, you are being trained to come back and deal with Kenyans, peace-loving Kenyans, people who are going, doing their day-to-day duties without getting involved into crime. So I believe if we continue that trend, the recruitment process and the training process, then automatically the disconnect between the public and the police officers will continue to be there. And that is the wound that needs to be treated.
George, I recognize that, first of all, most of the changes that we get to witness, are triggered by concerns. You will talk about the 2000 post-election violence, and then there's a recommendation and a reform and a task force that is set to address these concerns. Of course, we talk about the Gen Z one that will automatically, again, trigger, some reform processes ongoing. We've talked about the 2010 Constitution, and listening to what George says, does it not worry us that, there's a lot of stakeholder engagement, and this then would mean ask the police, what would you want different? Ask those ones that are former policemen, what would we do different so that we make, the service better? Yet, up until now, we do not speak of tangible progress in terms of making the situation better. What does it speak? If we're going to look at the Constitution, the 2010 Constitution, then talk about reforms that apparently seem not to yield any form of fruit. Because if you're looking at the different recommendations by the different task forces, you realize that there's a recurrence of the concerns. Talk about underfunding, talk about leadership concerns, talk about welfare of the police. What are we doing?
Yeah, thank you, Lillian. What I can say is that all is not lost. First thing, when the reform process actually began in 2010, let me just delve into what Musamali just spoke about with regard to the training. Currently, the NPS has incorporated a lot of human rights trainings in its curriculum so that it is human rights centered. If you go to every training, there is that aspect. They invite resource persons to come and speak on the reforms, on what is expected of the service. So not that it is not happening, a lot is happening on the ground. Perhaps what is missing is that it's not being felt out here, that do we have now a reformed and a transformed officer? And as I said earlier, there are many things. Sometimes people say you cannot teach an old dog new tricks, but it will take time. But as human beings, every human being has the ability to learn. However, accepting that I need to change, that is what is the most difficult thing in a human being. Now, when it comes to other things affecting the service, of course, underfunding, it has its own systemic issues. And here we have the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, where I come from. It makes recommendations, and the study that was there just a few months ago indicated that among the recommendations that we've given to the service, they have been able to implement at least 53%, just slightly above average. That was good progress. However, as an authority, we would wish that they go a little bit higher to even 70%.
What are some of the things you recommended, and what's the compliance rate on those things?
A lot of things, especially, is on detention facilities, the condition. People currently are not being arrested and then kept more than 24 hours. They comply to that. Detention facilities are clean. On police welfare, you can see what is happening. Even the Maraga Task Force is still recommending something on police welfare. So it is both for the service and both for the citizens.
I'm glad, just a second, I'm glad you say that, and I'm glad you can admit that the implementation, just like Tatiana said earlier, is not perfect. It's just slightly above average, as you say, and clearly there's a lot of room for growth. But let me bring you in. Tatiana, this issue of human rights, he says right now it's been inculcated into the curriculum that human rights is key, and we've got people coming to speak, to teach on the matter and speak on the matter to the trainees. But where are the gaps right now? Because the effectiveness of this training is in question.
At the moment, actually, I think there's a ongoing conversation with the Police Reforms Working Group of Kenya, which hosts around 21 human rights organizations and grassroots level organizations that are also advocating for reforms within the police force that will in turn benefit the public. One amongst the many things that they're advocating for are the three policies, which I think he's touched on, the community policing policy, the national policing policy, I seem to forget the third one, but the one for the community policing policy majorly touches on the aspects of human rights in regards to the training of how the police officers handle the public while they're on their day-to-day obligations. So I'd say the gap is actually, I keep emphasizing implementation of what we already have.
Why? Why is that a problem?
If the conversation is already ongoing, yes, and we have this ideology that we should have these policies already implemented, the suggestions have already been made, yeah? Now the back and forth comes in where the proposals are made, but they're returned. They're made again, amended, returned. So the back and forth really counters the work that the police reform working group is trying to do, as well as the other organizations that are working to benefit not only the police service, but in turn also benefit the public. So I'd say the gap comes in with the correlation between the National Police Service Act, the National Police Service, as well as now the public.
All right.
So that's where the gap comes in.
There's also another question that came up around the Gen Z protest, and I think all of you on the panel have touched on it. And it's a subject on the response when it comes to when these officers are faced with crowds of protesters and everything. Someone said here about decision making and poor decision making on that. What would you say are the big lessons in this? Because this is the last, okay, let me put it this way. The Gen Z protests and the issue with the abductions are the last two major publicly discussed challenges between the public and the police. What would you say is the key lessons that you would extract from this season when it comes to the police?
This mentality of do unto others as what has been done to you that's within the police force needs to be completely eradicated. Let's start from there. Being able to view citizens as people, imagining that they're actually fighting for your rights as well in the process of advocating for their own, needs to be recognized as well within the police force. This issue of awareness when it comes to how do we vocalize the issues we are facing as also the public, and how the police in turn responds. He's talked about decision making. In that instance, it's not always, the answer is not always force. The answer can be some reasoning. Let's talk about this, or let's try and handle this in a different way. Why is it that the first thought or mentality is, let's do away with this whole conversation, like there's no conversation in process, let's just guns up.
Physical dialogue.
We go full in force, yeah? Why is that always the case? It boils down against what he said, training and leadership. Yeah. So once we eradicate these issues pertaining to training, and then we tackle the issue on leadership, where this mentality and mindset completely shifts from doing unto others what has been done to you within the police force, we'll be able to solve other challenges.
Tatiana, the human rights defenders are at the heart of any form of change that we should expect. There are instances where we felt like the police feel like, the human rights are literally inciting the public, the defenders are inciting the public against the police. What do you suppose then is the role that the human rights defenders are playing in terms of making sure that, they push for sustainable reforms? And these reforms then should better the situation for the police as well for the masses.
I think what we tend to forget is that police officers are also humans. They also tend to forget that as well. And I think it's important to recognize that at the end of the day, when we're advocating for human rights, it's not only human rights for the public, it's human rights for everyone. Everyone, no matter your position, no matter your background, whatever role you have had to play, it's human rights for everyone. So by the time we realize that we're advocating for human rights for everyone, this trickles down within the entire community. It comes from even a family aspect. If you look at in the family setup, what you learn from your parents is what you implement with your children. So if you come into the human rights aspect now in the police service, if you talk about leadership in the sense that what they're learning from the leaders, based on what our colleague has shared, they're being taught based on what they learned and what their predecessors learned.
Okay.
So being able to change that entire mindset is just the beginning of everything. Once we're able to eradicate that mindset, we'll be able to see the shift from the force translating now into the service.
Right.
Yeah.
And as you top up to what then the question of the mindset is, George, Tatiana as well highlights the importance of community policing initiatives in terms of addressing this and making sure that we have a strengthened will, of course, that is across, how the police get to serve the masses. Just how do we then also ensure that community policing initiatives are strengthened, as well as, the incorporation of citizen involvement in ensuring that we are able to maintain this aspect of security? And equally then, one would want to ask, what then is the role of the National Police Service Commission in terms of making sure that, of course, the service itself is, streamlined?
Actually,
yes,
there's a question from an officer who serves in Laikipia. And I think he was going to do a call with us. He called when we were on the break.
Right.
Producers just say that. But he's asking the very same question. What is the role of the National Police Service Commission? And this is a serving officer who's asking that question.
Yeah. I think what Mr. Lagatia said is that through intervention by stakeholders, we've achieved 53% or 54% thereabout of the reforms that we want in the police. What about the other percentage? What is the problem? And in the spirit of the 2010 Constitution, we brought in several interventions to reform the police. The formation of IPOA was one of them. We insisted and said that we want the Internal Affairs Unit that will investigate police excesses before they get out to IPOA. And then we talked about now having the National Police Service Commission. What is the role of the Police Service Commission? We said the police commander should only remain with operational command. BACMA, operational command. And then the National Police Service Commission will deal with the human resource aspect of police matters. Human resource include recruitment, training, welfare, matters of promotions. But when it came to implementation, we are still talking about implementation, there was resistance from the operational part of the police. They said, no, you cannot be promoting people for us. You cannot be transferring people for us. We have an issue that is supposed to be investigated by IPOA. They will resist because they are looking at self-preservation. Yeah, and that is where we are now having a problem. We have a complaint where right now, if you go to Vigilance House, we have more than 8 Inspector Generals of Police sharing a same office without mandate. You go to a place like Central Region, you find commissioners of police, 8 of them, not deployed. And then the person who is the regional commander right currently is also a commissioner of the same rank. These are issues that were supposed to be solved by the National Police Service Commission, where they look and then say we need to have 8 inspectors on merit promotion. Where are we deploying them? Now issues is that the police command is just promoting people without any structures. And this is why that officer is asking that question, because even issues of transfers, it will depend on who you know within the service. If you want to be deployed to the traffic department, you have to know somebody. If you want to go for a promotion, dig into your pocket. And these are the issues that actually bedeviling the police. And you see, when it happens to you, automatically you will transfer this frustration to somebody else. And who is that person? Members of the public. And from where I sit, the whole of this problem, the issues of implementation, the answer is one: lack of political goodwill to reform the police.
What do you mean by that?
We are talking about excessive use of force by the police during the GNZ demonstrations.
Yes.
How did it come about? We had from the politicians getting out and talking and say, try it and you will see. They were giving unlawful orders to the police. And how did we get there? 2010, we said we wanted an independent Inspector General of Police. We wanted an independent police service. The first Inspector General of Police was selected independently, and people applied. We had David Kimayo, who was appointed. We had Grace Kahindi as the DIG, and we had Mr. Arachi as the DIG APS. And all these people had security of tenure for their offices. You could not remove them. So at some point, this same political class went to parliament and said, we cannot be able to work without controlling the police. Because in other countries in the region, you will find that these presidents have the luxury of controlling the military. In Kenya, we have a very professional military that you cannot bring on the streets to do your jobs, that work for you. So who do we have at our disposal from those years? It's the police. And then 2010, we saw the mess in 2007, 2008, and we said, let us reform, remove politics from police service, let them be independent. And you saw immediately Kimayo started working, implementing these reforms that were recommended by the Krieglers and the Kinawakis. People felt uncomfortable. He was pushed out. He did not retire. He was told to resign. Equally, Grace Kahindi. And right now, everybody that is occupying that office is a political appointee. We don't have an independent police service. And that is why they don't make independent decisions, as Mr. Lagatia articulated, that I am the commander on the ground, the commander on the ground. I look at this situation, I sweet talk the GNZ and tell them, look here, this is our country, what do people want? Can you please disperse peacefully? The order is always the Minister for Interior coming out, calling a press and saying, try it, it's illegal. Yet the Constitution says people are allowed to assemble and picket. So this issue, the whole issue of police reforms, at 54, when we talk about all these issues, remember he talked about introduction of the aspect of human rights in the police.
Yes.
Even when I was there, I remember I went for some training in Kiganjo. I found, we used to call it liberal studies. It was there, talking about how you're supposed to handle members of the public, talking about when you go out for patrols, how you're supposed to deal with the situation. You find a drunkard, you're supposed to take this person to the police station, give him a comfortable place to sleep, and then when sobers up, enda nyumbani.
Does that actually happen?
Not putting him in the cells, yeah?
Guys, has this actually happened to you? Have you been treated this way?
A traffic offense, minor traffic offense, you're cautioned and told, don't do it. You get? So it was there. And then after we had these demonstrations articulating for the removal of Section 2A, you saw the way the GSU handled the public. Unfortunately, I was part of that team. Then I was still green. I didn't know.
Okay.
So after that, when I went to training school now as a trainer, somebody also said, no, these officers are sick people. We need to retrain them on aspects of human rights.
Human rights.
I was the first instructor to be taken for training to come and train the liberal studies in the GSU. So we saw the problem and all interventions were being tried. But when it comes to issues of now politics getting into the service, then it becomes difficult even to reform the police to the standards that we articulated or we envisioned in the 2010 Constitution. So if we want these reforms, we should go back to the spirit of the 2010 Constitution and say independent police service, Inspector General of Police, competitively selected and appointed, return the security of tenure and tell him now, if you fail, it is you as a person.
I have a follow-up question for a gentleman from MyPoa.
Yes.
Just a quick one. From an oversight point of view, are you seeing a change in the kind of cases that come to your desk from when you started out and now? Are we seeing a change in attitude? Because you get to see the police in a way that the public are not able to see. Are you able to see a change?
And perhaps to top it up, I mean, what do we need to ensure that we also strengthen IPOA, for better accountability?
Yeah, thank you. The question is there a change? Has there been change in the National Police Service since, let's say, 2010? There has been. For example, just to give an example, in that year, 2010, every day you would hear in the media all over people saying the police have been able to gun down 10 robbers, they've been able to gun down pickpockets who are on the streets. Currently, it is a thing of the past. I think the biggest challenge that is there now is on public order management. That is the biggest challenge that Kenyans have, and not on other aspects of policing. And the other one challenge that is still there is perhaps on this corruption that is still rife within the service, especially in the traffic department, where they openly collect bribes. But there has been change. Now, from an oversight perspective, and the strategies that the Independent Policing Oversight Authority has put in place to be able to address and reform and professionalize the service. One of them is that we have been able to receive complaints. Civilians and even police officers come and complain, and we receive those complaints. We investigate, and where culpability is found, an officer is taken to court. Currently, we have over 220 cases that are ongoing before a court of law. Those officers must account for their actions through that process. There are others which we have investigated and referred for disciplinary action to the NPSC and to the Inspector General, which are also ongoing. Each and every day, we do monitor police operations where we are in the knowledge that they are carrying out an operation. We do inspect the police facilities, the detention facilities, their premises, to see whether they comply to human rights standards. But as I said earlier, this is work in progress. A journey of 1,000 miles begins somewhere before you reach that 1,000 miles.
All right.
All right, Satyana, from your very own experience, what do you suppose could be some of the challenges that police officers actually get to face that might largely contribute to human rights violation? I know Musamali has highlighted a couple of them, but what is this inhumane thing that they could be going through that then would get them actually equally, treating the public in a rather rough manner?
Earlier, before we came on set here, we had a conversation and we were talking about how you can interact with a police officer and you can get away with it. You just talk to them in a humane version and you tell them, Askari, maybe it's a traffic offense, and you tell them it's the first time genuinely, I didn't know where I went wrong. And you meet someone exceptional who will explain to you where you actually went wrong and how you go about it. If it's something that's a fine, if something that they can caution you and you get away with it and you won't repeat it again. Such circumstances, normally, at least you learn from your experience. Right. But you find other instances. Personally, I believe that my most recent negative experience with the police force was during the Gen Z demonstrations. Unfortunately, we had situations where we even have court orders where police officers are being ordered by the court to produce identification before arresting people. The police force, as is mentioned, by the way, has actually been weaponized by political figures to the extent that people are able to get away with the fact that one day someone is here, the next minute they're not here. And we're calling them disappearances. We seem to forget that we are also governed by international laws. We are subject to international laws, such as the ICCPR, the Roman Statute. There was a conversation the other day about the Kenya becoming a signatory to the I'm forgetting the name, unfortunately. But yeah, all these issues do tie up to the fact that human rights plays a central role. As a police officer, if you are a human, I believe you'll exercise your human rights. You would want your human rights to be exercised as well. When it comes to training, fine, maybe there's some issues pertaining to how they're taken through their training. Maybe the subjects from the beginning, as he's explained, how they're treated from the beginning, and even when they come out at the end, it's not the same person. Yeah, and that's why I'm saying they want to implicate the same to the people they interact with outside, the common mwananchi. And the common mwananchi in defense will respond accordingly. Yeah, so you find that it stems deep down, even as human beings, as an individual yourself. You ask yourself as a police officer, would I want this to be done to me if I was a common mwananchi?
Yeah.
So why would you do that to someone else?
Okay. All right, and of course we have some questions here from Frank Matelong. I want us to internalize them or perhaps just try and digest them, and then we can respond to them. This is what Frank asks. There are police convicts who have breached police reforms. Another one, why does police still breach Article 49 and Article 50? Goes ahead to ask, what are your views on those innocent Kenyans who were wrongly convicted based on police evidence? And what are your views on police torture, bribe, and obtaining money by false pretenses, as well as termination of cases? And number 5, are there mental assessment of officers who use guns? Last but not least, say something about power of mercy and decongestment of prisons. And of course, we take that break. We'll be coming back to respond to what it is that we can after that.